All right, folks, I'm gonna need you to wrap it up. You don't belong here. Time to leave.
We're just eating dinner. We haven't done anything wrong.
I said it's time to go. You heard me.
Officer, please.
We're paying customers.
Not anymore. Out of the booth, all of you, right now, or you're getting arrested for trespass.
Mom.
It's okay, baby, we'll go.
Move it.
A black family walks into a diner. A tired, grieving black family, after driving 11 hours straight from Birmingham, Alabama, to Memphis, Tennessee. They are not loud. They are not causing a scene. They are not doing anything except trying to feed their children before one of the hardest nights of their lives. And before they even make it to a booth, an off-duty cop walks in behind them and has them removed. No badge shown. No law broken. No reason given, at least, not one the family ever heard. Just 4 words from the owner: "I need y'all to go." That is the story. And if you think this is the kind of thing that only happens in headlines you scroll past, keep watching, because this one is real, and it gets worse before it gets better. The Caldwell family had been on the road since early that morning. Marcus Caldwell was driving. His wife, Cheryl Caldwell, sat in the passenger seat. Their daughter, Imani, was 7 years old. Their son, Eli, was 4. They were not on vacation. They were not visiting for the holidays. They were driving to Memphis to bury Grandma Rose. The kind of grief that comes with that, the quiet, heavy kind, does not leave room for much else. Marcus and Cheryl barely spoke for most of the drive. The children fell asleep before they crossed the state line. By the time Marcus pulled into the gravel parking lot beside Della's diner, it was close to 9 o'clock at night, and the family was exhausted in every way a family can be exhausted. Della's diner was not a big place. It was a small, wood-paneled building on the outskirts of Memphis with a hand-painted sign out front and the smell of cornbread drifting out every time someone opened the door. Marcus Caldwell had eaten there as a boy, on trips to visit his grandmother. There was something about the place that still connected him to her memory, to the life she had lived. So when he saw it that night, he pulled in. Not because it was convenient. Because it felt like the right place to stop. Marcus helped Cheryl out of the car. The night air was cool, the kind of cool that settles into your bones after hours of sitting still. Imani was half asleep, leaning into her mother's side, her small hand gripping the front of Cheryl's jacket. Eli rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand and asked, "Are we eating here, Daddy?" Marcus said yes. He held the door open and let his family walk in ahead of him. The warmth from inside hit them immediately, the smell of cornbread, the low hum of conversation from the few people already seated. They walked toward the door together, a tired family, moving slowly, not drawing attention to themselves. Under any other circumstance, no one would have noticed them at all. They did not make it to a booth. The man who stopped them was not a stranger to that parking lot. Officer Dale Pritchard had been sitting in his personal truck for about 20 minutes before the Caldwells arrived. He was off duty. He was not in uniform. He was eating a takeout order. And when the Caldwell family walked through that door, something shifted in Dale Pritchard, something that had nothing to do with a threat and everything to do with who the Caldwells were the moment they walked into his line of sight. Pritchard followed them inside. He walked up to the owner, a man named Gerald Hoskins, and told him the family looked like trouble. He asked Gerald Hoskins to ask them to leave. Gerald Hoskins hesitated. Gerald Hoskins said, "They haven't done anything, Dale." But Dale Pritchard leaned in close and said something quiet, something only Gerald Hoskins heard. Something that carried the weight of a badge, even though no badge was showing. Gerald Hoskins looked at Marcus. He looked at Cheryl holding Imani against her side. He looked at Eli, who had just asked if they were eating there. And Gerald Hoskins made a choice. He turned to the Caldwells and said, "I'm sorry. I need y'all to go." Marcus Caldwell did not argue. Marcus Caldwell did not raise his voice. Marcus Caldwell had been black in America long enough to know which moments you walk away from and which ones you do not. This was not the moment to fight. This was the moment where the wrong move could turn a quiet evening into something dangerous. So Marcus gathered his children, took Cheryl's hand, and walked back out into that parking lot without saying a word. Cheryl did not cry, not yet. Not in front of her children. Imani looked back once, over her father's shoulder, at the warm light spilling out of the diner door. The door closed behind them. That was the night the Caldwell family learned exactly how much their presence was worth to certain people in this country. Not in a courtroom. Not on the news. In a parking lot, on a Tuesday in March, with no one watching and no one to tell them they were wrong for being there. And for a long time after that night, it looked like that was the end of the story. It was not. Dale Pritchard was 38 years old. He had worked for the Memphis Police Department for 9 years. 9 years on the force, and in that entire time, not one person in a position above him had ever seriously questioned his behavior. That is not an accident. That is a system doing exactly what it was built to do: protect the people inside it, even when the people inside it do not deserve that protection. Pritchard was not the kind of officer who made headlines. He was not reckless in the way that draws immediate attention. He did not shoot anyone. He did not get into high-speed chases. He operated in the quiet spaces: the parking lots, the storefronts, the moments where no camera was pointed at him and no one was watching closely enough to take note. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never been held accountable for anything. And in 9 years, he had not been. The night he removed the Caldwells from Della's diner, Dale Pritchard was off duty. He was not in uniform. He did not show a badge. He did not identify himself as a police officer. He simply walked into a business, spoke to the owner, and used the invisible weight of what he was to get a black family removed from a public space. And when it was over, when the Caldwells were back in their car and pulling out of that gravel lot, Dale Pritchard went back to his truck, finished his meal, drove home, watched television, and went to sleep. The Caldwell family had stopped existing the moment they left that parking lot. To Dale Pritchard, that night was nothing. But here is what matters, and this is the part that changes the entire story. The night in the diner was not the first time Dale Pritchard had done something like this. It was not even close to the first time. Gerald Hoskins, the owner of Della's diner, had seen Pritchard do this before. Not to the Caldwells specifically, but to other black families. Other black men. Other quiet evenings that Pritchard turned into something ugly. And every single time it happened, Gerald Hoskins had looked away. Every single time, Gerald Hoskins had made the same choice: compliance over conscience. It was easier. It was safer. And Pritchard knew that. Other business owners in the Memphis area knew Dale Pritchard too. Not by reputation in the way that would raise flags. By experience. Pritchard had leaned on other diner owners, other restaurant owners, other small business operators the same way he leaned on Gerald Hoskins: quietly, privately, with the unspoken threat of what a badge can do to a small business when the person holding it decides to make your life difficult. These owners did not talk about it publicly. They did not file complaints. They made the same calculation Gerald Hoskins made every single time. It was not worth the trouble. Dale Pritchard was not worth the fight. For 9 years, the Memphis Police Department had no reason to look closely at Dale Pritchard, or at least, that is what the department wanted everyone to believe. Because the truth is, the warning signs were there. They had been there for a long time. An internal affairs officer had quietly flagged Dale Pritchard's pattern of behavior 2 years before the Caldwell incident. That flag was not ignored by accident. It was buried deliberately by someone with the authority to do so. A supervisor inside the department made sure that complaint went nowhere. And because it went nowhere, Dale Pritchard kept doing exactly what he had always done, in exactly the same way, with exactly the same confidence. That decision, the decision to look away, made not just by business owners, but by the people inside the department itself, is the reason Dale Pritchard was still on that force the night the Caldwells walked into Della's diner. It is the reason he felt confident enough to do what he did. It is the reason no one stopped him for 9 years. And it is the reason this story does not end in that parking lot. Because somewhere along the way, someone decided they were done looking away. And when that happened, everything changed. The Caldwells left that parking lot and did not look back. Not because they did not want to. Because looking back would have meant acknowledging what had just happened, and acknowledging what had just happened meant feeling it fully, and Marcus Caldwell was not ready to feel it fully. Not yet. Not with his children in the car. So he opened the back door, helped Eli into his seat, and closed it gently. Cheryl sat down in the passenger side without a word. Marcus got behind the wheel. The car was quiet. The only sound was the engine turning over and the low hum of the road ahead of them. They found another place to eat that night. A gas station diner 2 towns over, under fluorescent lights, with food that tasted like nothing. Imani did not ask any questions. Eli fell back asleep before the food arrived. Cheryl ate half of what was on her plate and pushed the rest aside. Marcus watched his family across that table and understood something he had understood before many times before but had never felt this clearly. The world does not owe a black family dignity. It does not come automatically. It has to be earned, fought for, or sometimes, simply survived. The next morning, Marcus Caldwell buried Grandma Rose. The service was short. The ground was hard from the cold. A few of Grandma Rose's old friends stood at the graveside in their dark coats, and a pastor said words that Marcus barely heard. Imani held Cheryl's hand the entire time. Eli stood beside Marcus, quiet in a way that a 4-year-old is rarely quiet, as though he understood that this was a moment that required stillness. When it was over, they drove back to the car, and Marcus sat behind the wheel for a long time before turning the key. The drive back to Birmingham was 11 hours of silence. Cheryl did not cry in the car. She cried that night, alone in the bathroom, with the shower running so the children would not hear. She cried for Grandma Rose. She cried for the way the evening at the diner had felt, the way a simple act of walking into a warm room had been treated like a threat. She cried for Imani. Because Imani had seen it. Imani had been 7 years old, half asleep and leaning into her mother, and she had watched the owner of that diner look at her family and decide they did not belong there. Cheryl knew what that moment would stay in her daughter. She knew it because it had stayed in her, from a time long before Imani was born. There are things a mother cannot protect her child from. Not because she does not try. Because the world does not wait for permission before it teaches a child what it thinks they are worth. Cheryl had hoped not naively, but desperately that she could shield Imani from that lesson for a little longer. That night in Memphis, that hope was taken from her in 4 minutes. Marcus did not file a report. He did not call anyone. He did not post about it. He carried it the way he had carried moments like this before, quietly, without explanation, like a weight he had learned to walk with a long time ago. Some people would ask later why Marcus did not speak up. Why he did not fight back. Why he did not demand answers from the diner owner, or go to the police, or do any of the things that people who have never been in that position assume they would do. The answer is simple. Marcus Caldwell knew what happens when a black man raises his voice in a situation like that. He knew what happens when the wrong person decides you are a problem. He had seen it happen to other men. He had heard the stories. He had made a calculation in that parking lot, a calculation that black men make every single day in this country, and the calculation was this: go home. Keep your children safe. Let it go. Because the alternative was not justice. The alternative was danger. Months passed after that night. The Caldwells went back to their lives in Birmingham. Cheryl started a small catering business out of their home, something she had dreamed about for years, something that had nothing to do with Dale Pritchard or Della's Diner or any of it. Marcus picked up extra shifts at the warehouse. Imani started 2nd grade. Eli learned to ride a bike without training wheels. Life moved forward. Not because the wound had closed. Because the living demanded it. You do not get to stop moving just because someone reminded you of your place in the world. You keep going. You raise your children. You build what you can. And you carry the rest. But here is the thing about what happened in that diner. It did not just affect the Caldwell family. It affected Gerald Hoskins too. Because Gerald Hoskins was the one who said the words. Gerald Hoskins was the one who looked at a grieving family, a father, a mother, a 7-year-old girl and a 4-year-old boy, and told them to leave. Gerald Hoskins had not been forced to do it. No one put a gun to his head. No one arrested him. Dale Pritchard said something quiet, something that carried weight, and Gerald Hoskins made a choice. He chose the easier path. He chose the path that kept his business safe, that kept Dale Pritchard from making his life difficult. He chose himself over the Caldwells. And the moment he did, the moment those words left his mouth, something inside Gerald Hoskins broke in a way he did not feel right away. It took time. It took weeks. Gerald Hoskins went back to running his diner the next day. He opened at the same time. He cooked the same food. He served the same customers. But something had shifted. Something had changed in the way Gerald Hoskins saw himself, in the way he saw what he had allowed to happen inside his own building. He had spent years building Della's Diner into something that mattered to the community. A place where people came to eat, to sit, to feel like they belonged. And in 4 minutes, on a Tuesday in March, Gerald Hoskins had let that meaning collapse. Not because he had no choice. Because he had made one. That is where the story almost ended. With a family that had moved on, a cop who felt nothing, and a diner owner who was learning to live with what he had done. For a long time, it looked like that was all this story was going to be, another quiet night that no one remembered, another moment swallowed by the weight of everything else. It did not stay that way. 8 months after the night in March, Gerald Hoskins picked up the phone and called Marcus Caldwell. It was not an easy call to make. Gerald Hoskins had spent weeks finding the Caldwell's contact information, tracking it down through a mutual acquaintance in Birmingham, someone who knew Marcus. It took longer than it should have. And every day between deciding to make that call and actually making it, Gerald Hoskins almost stopped himself. Almost convinced himself that a phone call would not change anything. That the Caldwells had moved on. That reaching out would only reopen something that had already been buried. But Gerald Hoskins could not sleep. Not properly. Not the way he had slept before that night. He would lie in bed and replay the evening, not Dale Pritchard's words, but the faces. Cheryl Caldwell holding Imani against her side. Eli asking if they were eating there. The way Marcus Caldwell had gathered his family without raising his voice and walked out of that diner like a man who had done this before. Gerald Hoskins would lie there in the dark and think about the choice he had made, and every time he replayed it, the weight of it got heavier. So Gerald Hoskins called. He told Marcus everything. He told him what Dale Pritchard had actually said, the exact words, the implicit threat. He told Marcus that he had found the family's contact information and that he was sorry. Not the kind of sorry that is easy to say. The kind that costs something. The kind that comes from a place of real guilt, real shame, and a genuine understanding of what had been done. Marcus Caldwell listened to all of it. When Gerald Hoskins finished, Marcus said, "I appreciate that, Mr. Hoskins." And for a while that was enough. A wound acknowledged. A man admitting that he had been part of it. But Gerald Hoskins did not stop there. Because acknowledging what happened was not the same as doing something about it. Gerald Hoskins had spent years watching Dale Pritchard operate in the Memphis area. He had seen Pritchard pressure other business owners the same way he had been pressured. He had seen other black families turned away from other establishments under the same quiet threat. And every single time, Gerald Hoskins had looked away. He had told himself it was not his fight. He had told himself it was not his place. He had told himself that speaking up would only make things worse for him, for his business, for everyone involved. Gerald Hoskins was done telling himself that. Not because something dramatic happened. Not because someone pushed him or pressured him or told him it was time. It was a slow, quiet shift, the kind that happens inside a person over weeks and months, when the thing you are carrying becomes too heavy to keep carrying alone. Gerald Hoskins had built Della's Diner with his own hands. It was not just a business to him. It was proof that he could create something that mattered. Something that fed people. Something that made a small part of Memphis feel like it belonged to the community rather than to the people who had power over it. The night he let Dale Pritchard use his diner to humiliate a grieving family, Gerald Hoskins did not just fail the Caldwells. He failed everything he had spent years building. Over the course of the following year, Gerald Hoskins began writing things down. Dates, names, specific interactions he had witnessed or heard about. He reached out to 2 other business owners in the Memphis area who had experienced the same pressure from Dale Pritchard, owners who had kept quiet for the same reasons Gerald Hoskins had kept quiet. It took time to get them to talk. Trust did not come easily. These were people who had made a calculated decision to stay silent, and changing that decision meant accepting that speaking up could have real consequences. But Gerald Hoskins kept reaching out. And one by one, they agreed. 18 months after the night in March, a journalist at the Memphis Commercial Appeal began looking into complaints against Dale Pritchard. The complaints did not come from the Caldwells. The Caldwells had no idea any of this was happening. The complaints came from Gerald Hoskins. From the other business owners who had finally agreed to talk. From a woman named Patricia Dunn, whose son had been detained by Dale Pritchard outside a grocery store in 2019 without any cause. And from something that surprised everyone, an internal affairs officer inside the Memphis Police Department who had quietly flagged Pritchard's behavior 2 years earlier. That flag had been buried, but it still existed. And when the journalists started asking questions, that buried flag surfaced. The story ran in April. By May, it had been picked up across the region. By June, the Memphis Police Department suspended Dale Pritchard pending a full internal review. For the first time in 9 years, someone with the authority to act on what Dale Pritchard had been doing was forced to look at it directly. And what they saw was not a single incident. It was a pattern. A long, documented, deliberately protected pattern. And the people who had protected it were not invisible. They were inside the department. They had names. They had ranks. They had made choices, the same kind of choice Gerald Hoskins had made in that diner, and those choices were about to be exposed. When Dale Pritchard's personnel file was unsealed during the internal investigation, what was inside it did not surprise Gerald Hoskins. It surprised everyone else. 2 prior complaints against Dale Pritchard, both filed by black families. Both dismissed. Not reviewed and found without merit. Dismissed. Closed before anyone with real authority had to look at them closely. The complaints had been filed through proper channels. The families had done everything right. And the department had made sure those complaints disappeared quietly, the same way it had made sure the internal affairs flag disappeared 2 years before the Caldwell incident. The file did not reveal a single bad act. It revealed a system, a deliberate, functioning system designed to protect Dale Pritchard from accountability. The supervisor who had buried those complaints was a man named Captain Roy Ellison. Ellison had been with the Memphis Police Department for over 2 decades. He had signed off on the dismissal of both prior complaints. He had been the one to bury the internal affairs flag. When the journalist's story ran and the department was forced to conduct a full review, Captain Roy Ellison's role in all of it became impossible to ignore. Within the same week that Pritchard was suspended, Ellison was placed on administrative leave. The chain of protection that had allowed Dale Pritchard to operate for 9 years was not just cracked. It was laid out, piece by piece, for the public to see exactly how it had worked. Gerald Hoskins reached out to the Caldwells again after the file was unsealed. He connected them with an attorney. The civil suit that followed was not the kind of case that fills courtrooms with drama. It was quiet. Documented. Backed by Gerald Hoskins's testimony, every word of what Pritchard had said to him that night in the diner. Backed by the journalists' reporting. Backed by the unsealed records that showed how long the department had known about Pritchard and had chosen, deliberately, to do nothing. The Caldwells did not have to stand in front of a judge. They did not have to relive the night in the diner in a public forum. The city of Memphis settled out of court. The settlement was $1.8 million. The city did not admit wrongdoing. That means the city of Memphis paid $1.8 million without ever officially acknowledging that what happened to the Caldwells was wrong. That is not justice in the full sense of the word. But it was not nothing. And it carried consequences that went beyond the Caldwells. Dale Pritchard was terminated from the Memphis Police Department. Not suspended. Not reassigned. Terminated. 9 years on the force, and it ended not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a documented record that made it impossible for anyone to defend him any longer. Captain Roy Ellison did not return to work. He retired under pressure quietly, the same way the complaints against Pritchard had been quietly dismissed. The policy reforms that followed were not the result of public outcry. They were the result of the case itself. The Caldwell case forced the Memphis Police Department to change how it handled off-duty conduct and how supervisors responded to internal complaints. These changes were written into department protocol because of what happened in that diner and because of what the unsealed file revealed. Marcus Caldwell used part of the settlement to open a small business in Birmingham. Cheryl Caldwell expanded her catering company. Imani is in 4th grade now. Eli rides his bike through the neighborhood without fear. Their lives moved forward not because the country changed overnight, but because they built something on the other side of what had been done to them. Gerald Hoskins hung a small plaque by the register at Della's Diner. It does not mention Dale Pritchard. It does not mention the Caldwells by name. It reads, "Everyone eats here." So here is the question this story leaves you with. Dale Pritchard did not lose because the system worked. He lost because one man, Gerald Hoskins, could not carry the weight of what had been done in his diner any longer. Justice did not come fast. Justice came because someone chose to stop looking away. But how many families walked out of a parking lot like the Caldwells did quietly, without a word, carrying it like a stone in a pocket and never got that phone call? How many times did someone look away, and no one ever decided to stop?